How will we get there? We're looking at fundraising ideas. We are looking for general monetary donations, but also material donations. The more items we can get donated, the less money we have to actually raise. We're going to have various events that vary in size and target audience. We already know we're going to be doing a picket fence campaign. We have, between the hardtop and the kids play basketball on the hardtop. The ball goes into the parking lot a lot. So we need to put a fence there to keep the ball out of the parking lot. So we can put up a picket fence. We can do a campaign around that. We're also looking at, Goal For It, the Kickstarter campaigns, Donors Choose. I'm not sure if any of those would work for us, but we're looking into that as well. And if we need to, this project can be completed in phases. So if we're a few months into this and say we're really not going to hit that goal, what can we get done for next October? What makes sense to put off? We'll be able to do that as well. So our build date is for October of 2015. And as far as doing a community build model, I know you can worry about safety. This company is fully insured. Everyone who comes from the company to our site is a certified playground safety inspector, and they do have someone who is certified for the ADA compliance, and our structures will be ADA compliant. So for our next steps, we're seeking permission from you to continue to plan and to fundraise. We have notified the town of Newbury that we are looking at considering doing something for the schoolyard. We have not brought the plan to them. That'll be the next phase after this meeting. We are going to continue to develop the final plan and present it to all stakeholders, present it back to you as well, and hopefully build in October of 2015. Are there any questions?
Eileen, I have a question. Is the fundraising for this playground completely above and beyond the PTA regular budget? And I'm just wondering how it might affect other needs within the school.
Exactly. We're very, very cautious of that. I think that the PTA has said that we can receive some funding from some of their events as long as they're healthy for the year. We really need to educate really the parents, the families, that this giving to the playground is above and beyond what you normally do for the PTA. And that's just, I know that happens with all campaigns. And so we're not trying to, rob from Peter to pay Paul. And so we're really going to be cognizant of that, working with the annual fund, trying to make sure everyone really understands this. We're asking you to give more of yourself.
Anyone else have any questions? Monique?
What kind of fundraising events have you thought of?
Well, we're looking at a farm-to-table event at a local farm. We are looking at restaurant fundraisers, in-home fundraisers. There's talk of having a retired Bruins player come to one of our events. So we're looking at that kind of stuff right now.
Have you visited any of these types of playgrounds anywhere else to see how well received they are, how well constructed, and how much experience this company has had with what you've selected?
They did a playground in Ipswich at the Winthrop School, and that's actually where we first heard about it. And we visited the playground a couple of times. We were so interested, we went in the wintertime when there was all snow. It was covered in like 2 feet of snow. Dragged our kids there, kind of uncovered some of the pieces, and then went back again in the spring. And it was actually interesting for me to see that on a Saturday afternoon, there were families there on the playground. And I think it's just it was nice to see they actually used the space, not just for recess during school. So we actually looked at it, and we loved it, and we thought that the craftsmanship was fantastic. I've been taking my kids to see a lot of playgrounds lately.
I can't see it that well, but I'm just curious about that courtyard area. The last time I was in that courtyard, Mr. Forget was the principal of the school, and he was flipping hamburgers on field day. And in many years, I haven't really seen that space utilized, so it's kind of exciting to think. But I haven't been as a parent in the school recently, but I'm just curious what the plan is for that courtyard.
We actually do have a slide if you want that kind of towards the end. The plan is to put, I don't know if you remember, there's the overhang and there's the cement patio there. build out from that more decking, because teachers had said that they would probably use, like, 2 classes might go out there at a time. So we need to provide more seating. We would, here it is right here, so you can see the patio decking coming out. Kind of put some trees to add some shade to the area as well. Between, on the right-hand side, so as you're going, the top right picture, as you're going down that area, that's classrooms. So we need to put up tall grass. We're going to put some flowers to make it look nicer for them. Thinking about on this side of the tall grass, kind of putting a walkway. We need to look at, there is some concern from the teachers about noise still out there. And so we need to push the architect to think of ways that we can work with that more. On the left-hand side, I'm not sure if this is going to work because we only have like a 36-inch opening to get anything out there. So there is an idea to add some boulders and some more kind of movable space for the kids and for the teachers. So I hope we can use that space. It's
Paul, thanks.
I just have a suggestion. That Winthrop school that was done in Ipswich, the Masons in Ipswich at the John T. Hurd Lodge, they donated a lot of labor. And I actually wrote a check for them, part of the Masonic Angel Fund in Ipswich, part of that lodge. So St. John's Lodge up in Newburyport is one that should be tapped, and, you know, tell them, hey, those guys down in Ipswich took care of Winthrop, you need to take care of us.
oh, great.
And in terms of the Masonic Angel Fund writing a check, the focus was on the ADA portion of the playground where children with special needs, and you kind of tap that to access the Masonic Angel Fund.
Okay,
So just a
thank
suggestion.
you. And I think I missed probably part of the presentation, but we actually do have some committed resources for this. We have a local construction company that has said if you build, when not during our busy time, which October is not their busy time, I will have our workers come and help you build this. We have, the PTA has paid for everything up until now. Actually, someone who is not an NES family had heard about our project and said, you know, I want to give you guys $5,000 as a matching, do it as a matching gift to start you rolling. And this was someone that I didn't even know, I hadn't spoken to, heard about it through a family. So, you know, I think that there is some interest in this and some support.
Any other questions regarding a playground proposal? Could we have a motion to approve the Newbury Elementary School PTA's initial proposals for the improvement of the school playground subject to seeking final approval once the project details have been finalized?
So moved.
Could we have a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next item on our agenda is regarding the park assessment. It is Annex 8 in your packet.
The committee will recall that you asked for some information about park. Some of this report is a reminder. Some of it is new. You'll recall there's a consortium of a number of states preparing this assessment. The number is dwindling. There's concern that as the number of states involved declines, the costs to the remaining states will increase. The reason why states are withdrawing are primarily political in terms of local control by the state of the curriculum and assessment. You'll recall that it's aligned with, the tests are aligned with the Common Core, the MCAS, as we have it now, does not reflect the new state frameworks for ELA and mathematics, which are approved in 2010. You'll recall that the consortium is looking to develop an entirely computer-based assessment. We're involved this year, but we will be taking, the students will be taking the test. I think we shall all be taking the test in paper and pencil this year. There's a certain amount of skepticism as to whether or not it will be possible to assess all students using a computer. And later on another section, maybe I'll talk about it now, that there's concern as to whether or not they will be able to build in all the accommodations that students with disabilities now have a right to into a computer-based system. So we're going to be involved, grades 3 through 8, this year, except 5th grade science. The high school will continue to be assessed using the MCAS system. The MCAS system will remain the determinant as to whether or not high school students meet their graduation requirements, at least for the time being. On page 27, section 4, we tried to summarize the differences between the PARCC assessment and MCAS. Certainly we expect the assessments to be more rigorous than our students are being asked to respond to at the present time. There's some concern about that. Clearly there's a lot of discussion about Massachusetts comparing very favorably with international data in terms of student achievement and progress. And we may find that certainly initially students do less well on the PARCC assessment than they do on MCAS, because they're going to be asked to work with more complex texts, and the mathematics is going to be more rigorous. 4.2, the assessment will be in 2 parts. There'll be a performance-based section and an end-of-year test. And if you look at 4.5, you'll see that there's quite a difference in terms of the total amount of testing time with the PARCC system as compared with MCAS. It's interesting that just this week the state has announced that it is going to do a review of all the testing that students undertake, along the lines that we reported to you that we had done last year and completed this year. But they're going to be looking at the totality of state tests, district required tests, and school determined tests. The test will be time limited, plus 50%. We are going to need to review IEPs to ensure that where appropriate, IEPs do specify extended time, and that's going to be quite a big job. I'll come back to that later. Section 5 summarizes the preparations that the district has been taking. Chief Academic Officer has been holding briefing meetings with teachers. We're looking to provide opportunities for teachers to compare current MCAS assessments and what the students will be tackling in the spring. And then in a moment or two, I'm going to ask Kim to take you through the attachment, which illustrates some of the changes that students and teachers will be facing. But at 5.5, I just mentioned that there's an issue around the accommodations which will be available for students with special needs. The PARCC test does not include every accommodation that our students might currently be entitled to. Specifically, some students have individualized graphic organizers that they use, which could be a problem. We're also told that students, unless we ask, can only have one piece of paper, one piece of scratch paper to help them deal with the test, which seems a remarkable piece of micromanagement of the system. Some children will need more paper than that, and they won't be able to have personalized checklists to help them. So some of the supports that our students are currently used to will be taken away by the PARCC system. I have been challenging that initially by asking the state by what authority it can set aside a determination made by a properly constituted IEP team in terms of the accommodations. The response was, well, if the student uses accommodations outside the PARCC system, there'll be no results for that child. Following discussions with our special education attorney, I've gone back to the DES to ask them whether or not they agree that not allowing the students to have these supports means that they are not being provided with a free and appropriate public education I think we're likely to get into some litigation around this. I know that the superintendents who were part of the North Shore Education Consortium Board are very concerned about this, and we will keep on pressing. If the state wishes to continue down the line of the majority of students having a computer-based assessment, I think the only way, technically, though I'm ready to be proved wrong, the only way they can provide all the accommodations is to have paper and pencil and have some flexibility for some students. We will obviously be monitoring the whole thing very carefully, and we'll look to provide a report to you. We'll provide reports ongoing as we go through the experience, but at the end of the day, we'll need to come to a determination as to whether the park system is good for Triton, and we can then say what we need to say to the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education. Maybe I should just stop and ask if there are questions there, and then I would like Kim to take you through the example of the work that we're doing.
Can I ask for clarification? When it says individualized graphic organizers, checklists, or reference sheets will not be available, does that mean that they'll have generic ones that you can use? Because sometimes MCAS would let you use generic reference sheets that you submit and they approve, or checklists that they approve. They're not individual to the
Right.
person. You can use them for a class of special
What
ed
is
kids.
communicated to us is that they cannot use a graphic.
Any?
But
Oh.
the teachers are working with the students are to, when they get their blank piece of paper, to use one of the graphic organizers that we have been utilizing throughout K through 8th grade as far as keys to literacy. So it could be a 2-column node, it could be a Venn diagram, but they would have to make it themselves.
Can I just add, my worry about that is that I regard a graphic organizer as a support for a student who's going to find the work difficult. And if it's a compare and contrast, a Venn diagram's terrific. But if it's a top-down graphic organizer, probably not going to work as well. And so we can teach children to make up their own graphic organizers. The issue then is which one do they choose to solve the problem that they've got in front of them, and that I think is going to be a stretch for some children.
Tim, you're going to go over the time, because I have a couple questions about the time, the timing of
The time chart?
You're going to go over that afterwards, and then I'll ask questions?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think Dick has a question on what we've heard so far.
Uh,
And Paul?
I was amazed when I read this and I saw the difference in the times. Do all of the students complete the test, the MCAS as it stands now? Do they answer all the questions in the time allotted?
For the most
For the
part.
most
Well,
they-
they're allowed to have as long as they like.
Oh.
I mean, there is a kind of notional planning time, but some student, if the student needs to take all day, they can take all day.
Oh, okay.
I don't necessarily think that's a good thing, because quite frankly, if a student hasn't got to the bottom of it within a certain amount of time, the extra time is probably very unproductive in terms of what they're doing.
Paul?
Armin, I just had a question on 3.6 on the front page, on page 26. It talks about by the fall of 2015, whether or not the DESE will adopt or fully adopt the park system. Do you think there's a chance that they're only going to adopt some portion of it?
I think it's all or nothing, actually. That they'll either adopt Park, or if they don't adopt Park, they'll have to modify the MCAS. Some of us are sceptical that the fall 2015 is really a workable date, because the last assessments won't be taken until June. And so that doesn't give a lot of time for people to collect data, how did it go, to then have data available for the board in the early fall, maybe late fall. So there's some timing issues there, I think, in terms of the availability of evaluation data.
I just had one other question. How is it that they're going to do the open response on the park without a pen and paper?
There, on the park, there is pen and paper.
Oh, there is. It's not all computer
Yeah,
then?
but you can type into the computer-based assessment.
So is that how the open response is going to be? They're going to type in?
For this one?
Not for this
Not for this year, it's paper and pencil. So it'll be very similar looking as far
Okay.
as MCAS. They'll be writing on a piece of paper, but eventually it will be on the computer where they'll be doing word process in type of text box.
Okay, thank you.
Kim, would you like to take us through the illustration?
And not that I am defending the state, but the state did try, this is a unique moment, but the state did really push hard to have some of the graphic organizers and some of the other accommodations that we are used to having for the MCAS, but because they're part of a consortium, the park, they had to follow what the other states were agreeing to. So we've lost some autonomy going with that assessment as opposed to just the MCAS, so that I will say. So what you see in front of you is a park sample question from grade 6. As I have been visiting different schools, one of the objectives is to really have people focus in on what these questions look like. Not so much that I want them to teach to the test, but one thing you can appreciate when you start to look at these sample questions is how closely aligned they are to the Common Core and what the expectation is for these students. So you can appreciate the rigor in these questions, and they definitely are very unique to what we have seen in the past. So in this particular sixth grade passage, what you can see is a series of questions that is asking you to not only show that you are understanding what you're reading, but you're also identifying some text evidence and using context clues to understand that. But what is really unique about this is how some of the teachers over at Newbury, and this was done in one of the, not TLCs, but PLC meetings, is that one of the Keys to Literacy coaches said, okay, we have these questions based on these assessments, and we also have Keys to Literacy. How can we bridge these two things together so that teachers really have an understanding of how you use these strategies to get at some of the answers to the assessments? So that's what she did here. If you look at page 28D, the first thing that she starts, off with is the questions and the standards, which is so important because our work has to be grounded in the standards. It's not about finding a park assessment and teaching to that, because park could be gone tomorrow. It could be something else. So we need to focus and anchor ourselves in the standards, and that's exactly what she did. And so part up at the top, you see 1A, 2B vocabulary. She's showing you one of the key strategies that they use in teaching vocabulary and how you could pull that in to help students as they're guided through the text to answer these questions. And then she does the same thing, 3A, 4B plot, and she talks about a 2-column note here where they have the conflict and to the left and some text evidence. So again, the purpose of this document is to really get teachers to focus in on what is the expectation as far as the Common Core? What does it look like in an assessment? And how can we use the tools and strategies that we are incorporating every day into the classroom to help us be successful in meeting these standards and meeting the demands of the park assessment? And so I really give a lot of credit to the teachers who are addressing this and coming up with some creative ways to go deeper into the curriculum and really teaching children how to use some strategies, because it is going to be very rigorous, the complexity of the text, and kids need to have these strategies embedded in their working memory so that they can be successful. And if you continue on, it just goes through again 10 central main idea on 28B, talks about the proof, the open response. So again, all of these are representative of the Keys to Literacy 2-column notes, vocabulary work that they have been doing. And then from this model, the teachers then created their own questions using and then incorporating those same strategies. So they modeled it and then they gave the teachers a chance to practice it. But if you have a second to go through and really read the passage, you can get a flavor of what some of this reading is going to entail for these students.
Are there any questions on what Kim has presented? All right, thank you very much. The next item on our agenda is about the adoption of a new mathematics teaching materials, Annex 9 in your packet. We are considering a report on the need to introduce updated mathematics teaching materials and the establishment of a review committee.
I'm just going to say a word or two of introduction, then hand over to Kim and to Dan Jewett. If you haven't met Dan Jewett before, he's our curriculum and assessment coordinator. He's done the heavy lifting on this. But basically, we have a problem in that we have new standards that were adopted by the state in 2010, and our materials, teaching materials, don't reflect that curriculum. And so we've set about putting together a process to move towards adopting materials that will provide teachers and students with the material which is aligned to the new standards. I hope I haven't taken too much of your...
No. No, I just want to, before I pass the mic over to Dan, is just to say that the teachers even now are so more aware of the shift in the curriculum that they have been in the past, and they are rising to the occasion to look for different curriculum to support a program that is not aligned to the Common Core. And so as we discuss the park and the standards, and you are able to see the performance-based questions that they are asking, it really hits home that, wow, our curriculum is really not in line, and we need it to do this and be this way for us. So 2 years ago, I don't think they were as knowledgeable as what the standards were and what does that mean as far as shifts. Now they are definitely more educated and have a deeper understanding. So we met last year as far as a math committee, and we are really ready to move forward with this, and it's a big need. So I will now hand over the talking stick to Dan so he can give you some outlines as far as the process that we have gone through so far, and then what is our hope.
Well, thank you. As Kim said, we had a group of people together last year to put together a comprehensive math curriculum review, and this is really the cornerstone of what came out of that in terms of what needs to be done. With reference to both the change in standards and change in upcoming assessments, the need is really coming quickly. I think Triton was very wise to wait. It's very clear, as Kim just referenced, that I think a certain amount of education is important. I think the people who will serve on this committee have a firm understanding, not just of the Common Core, but really what the needs are and what they're looking for, what we currently lack. And the other thing is waiting for the publishing industry to catch up. And so from the conversations I've had with neighboring communities, schools, it's amazing hearing what those who went through it a year ago, 2 years ago, the options they had. Right now, there are really the three big publishers in Pearson, Houghton Mifflin, McGraw-Hill, they all have new material either that's been rolled out in the last year or is being rolled out in the next 6 months. And so I think it's very wise to wait. I think the time is coming soon in terms of a need for an investment in this area. And in particular, the goals of the material would be to eliminate the substantial amount of supplemental material being used throughout the district to address current standards. That supplemental material means that even on grade level, sometimes we're not aligned in terms of what one teacher is doing to supplement the curriculum is different than the next school over and even the next classroom. Second is to improve our alignment vertically as all the supplemental work is going on and people are working hard to kind of plug the gaps. It puts us out of line in terms of our vertical alignment. It's obviously to address the new standards. It is to match the kind of focus, coherence, and rigor that the new standards have, which are fundamentally different. It is to address the balance between conceptual understanding, fluency, and application, which are all real focus of the new standards. And lastly, the amount of change that has occurred in curriculum materials in the 14 years since we last purchased the math program. You're also talking about introduction of our students to opportunities to work with technology, both in terms of homework assignments, in terms of classroom assignments, and as we talk about the park and the computer section of that, these new materials, you know, one of the real competitive things that these publishers roll out is their tech side and what they have to offer school districts in that area. So that would be a significant change from what we have as well.
If I could just add a footnote, we're talking about K-8 here at the moment, and we did some work last year establishing criteria that we would use in the adoption process to make sure that we had checked off everything that we would hope that a new program would have. So we'd already done some work on that, and now we're looking to apply it in terms of a math adoption. I guess you're going to ask us how much this is going to cost, looking at the chair of the Finance Committee. Dan?
I've met with all three of the kind of main publishers. We have quotes in from 2 fully, and we're still waiting for half the kind of the middle school portion of the McGraw-Hill. But the Pearson and Houghton Mifflin quoted us kind of from soup to nuts, all the components of a program between $196,000 and $203,000. Those prices do not include professional development. That neighboring district that had a model very similar to ours, it was about $30,000 worth of professional development that was embedded throughout the course of the year, some up front initially, but then them coming back to the district throughout the year.
And so being realistic, we're probably looking at a phased introduction rather than kind of big bang.
Does anyone have any questions?
I have a real layman's question, and that is the shift from the pace and the rigor now to what the Common Core is expecting. I do get that, like, literacy in that area is important. We not only need to be able to do the math, but to be able to articulate why we're doing it and all that. But is the biggest shift that we're just kind of accelerating math at the younger ages? What, just a real general overview of the biggest changes that you see, because there could be a lot of people out there going, okay, what's the difference between calculus now and calculus under the new, you know?
Right. There has been a shift as far as where certain concepts and skills are being taught. So that's one of them. The other one is that they're not going out as broad. They're going deeper into some of the concepts and the application. So I don't know if you included in this one. There was an example where they had one question comparing MCAS to Park, and it was all about mean, median, and mode. And so they were asking on the MCAS question, basically, you know, just to give us the mean, median, mode of these certain numbers, where the Park question had already given them the information as far as that, but they had to analyze it, and then they had to come up with some new figures and really apply their conceptual knowledge to a new situation. So that is really taking it to a deeper level of understanding, and I would think that's one of the biggest shifts too that has to occur within the curriculum, is that performance-based of, okay, we know you know this, you can show us as far as skill work, but what about in a new setting? What about application? And are you able to explain it to us, your thinking? So I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
I think you said it well. I'd say if anybody, to look anywhere in particular, it's at the standards of mathematical practice, which are kind of these overarching principles that are woven through each year. And so to read some of those off, our students are being asked to make sense of problems and persevere in problem solving, reason abstractly and quantitatively, construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others, model with math, use the application of strategies, attend to precision, and look for and make use of structures. So you're talking about things, instead of kind of older terms of identify, define, you're getting things like make sense, reason, construct, model. And so, 2 plus 2 is always going to be 4, but there's very much a push on getting kids to understand why and how do you solve problems and how do you reason through them. And from a curriculum standpoint, that is just missing from the materials that we're using, that ability for teachers to go and have resources that are asking kids to model things, to construct things, to analyze. It's just not something that has been part of the curriculum before this.
Any other questions regarding the math program? Paul? Monique?
These these textbooks and these math curriculums, the textbooks that you're going to look at, are they going to have online support? Can you get the textbook online so you don't have to carry it around? And I had one other question. They're going to be new, and how are you going to know if those particular textbooks that you're selecting actually affect student achievement? And I'm asking this question because I remember the rage in the 90s was connected math. And I worked in urban schools, and it was supposed to be, the end all and be all, and ended up that the research showed that it was kind of a bust. So I'm a little bit wary of trends and things like that if you can't really prove it. So this is my question.
Yeah, I think it's wise to be leery of trends, and I think that's why it's wise that we've waited. And not, a lot of the programs were just kind of, they put a label on it and it's realigned and they moved something from the 6th grade to the 5th grade. The programs that we're looking at have been completely rewritten and meant to match the standards. I can't, what I can say is the assessment outcomes are one part. In terms of alignment to what's being asked of teachers and to teach and students to learn, these materials will be aligned to that. In terms of the first part of your question about the books themselves, depending on the program you're looking at, specifically the elementary is consumables. Students get a book, a workbook that is theirs, and we're sent a new one. That's one model. Some models, like for example, the McGraw-Hill, for the price that they're quoting, they'll send a consumable book for our students for 5 years. The last 2 years of their model in terms of pricing is based on it being completely computerized, with the idea that in 6 years, 5-6 years, we would be there. We meaning schools in general. But that's something that's really got to be looked at in terms of there's a range. All of them have strong technology components, but they differ in terms of what's online and what's not. And I can say in terms of teachers that I've spoken to, some have a real interest in that, and so it's something that the committee is going to have to take a hard look at.
Paul?
Ms. Farmer, I just have a question. When you talk about phased because of the size of the cost, what's your thought process about how it would be phased in?
Well, we might separate early elementary from more senior elementary, then middle.
So where would be your recommendation to start on something like that?
I don't have a recommendation. I think we need the committee to do the work and see where the natural breaks are. And if the economic future is less dire than it sounds as if it's going to be at the moment, then clearly, we might be in a position to do the whole thing. But at the moment, I think the assistant superintendent developing the budget would be very worried if we said we're going to go for broke. I think we need to get the report from the committee and see what its advice is.
Well, I appreciate that, but I think the assistant superintendent, I would like to liken the problem with this Swiss cheese approach to teaching our kids math to the track out there. I don't at all accept the proposition that we should continue on. I have held my breath, as everyone else here has, while we have waited to purchase the books. It's got to be done. I consider this part and parcel a function of differentiated instruction. If you've got a manual that you can rely on that's up to the Common Core, you can't expect teachers to run out for 4 different groups in a classroom and get handouts to test each and every one, or to challenge each and every one of those students, but rather, if you've got a good, reliable, up-to-date text, you tell those 4 kids, you got to read ahead a chapter, you people stay, you know, it's not rocket science, you know? So, I mean, I think the time is long overdue, in my opinion, to get the textbooks up to snuff. The only thing I would ask is that when the committee looks at these books, that they look at something that's been out for a year and take a hard look at it, as opposed to what's being rolled out, because we certainly don't want to drop this money and then say, oops. And I just have one other question. This professional development of $25,000 or $30,000, how does that play into what actually happens?
What happens is what we ask them to do. We're paying them to come and educate our teachers about the program. And so you can have different focus. You can ask them to focus on different things depending on the specific needs and interests of teachers. Typically, you're looking at an initial kind of overview of the program, of introducing kind of the components in a kind of a holistic way to teachers can see kind of the guiding principles of it. You're then looking at more specific opening of school PD in terms of breaking down a unit. You're then talking about a certain amount of introduction to the technology components, and depending on your faculty, that can range in terms of what their needs are, in terms of how best to utilize that. You're talking about introduction to the assessments. These new programs have a certain amount of assessment built into them. When you talk about laying that out, you make a good point about differentiation, something that I should have mentioned in terms of new materials and what we're using. The RTI differentiation materials is significantly improved here. So you're talking about a certain amount of instruction about how to use those and how to move between their tier 1 material and their tier 2 and tier 3 material. And then but that's something else that needs to be investigated in terms of the committee looking at not only the program that they're going to adopt, but then what kind of support they'll need. And I think that differs depending on whether it's something like Singapore math, which would be a shift from what we're doing now, versus something that's more traditional. And so I think you would get a range depending on the program you picked.
We ought to remember that it's only fairly recently that the state has mandated that teachers pass a math test in order to become a licensed teacher in the Commonwealth. And so we have a pretty wide, I'm not bad-mouthing teachers, but in terms of their experience, we've got a pretty wide range of experience amongst our teachers. And I think that part of this professional development will be making good deficits.
Dan or Kim, the timeline indicates that the program would be piloted in March or April of this spring. So the goal would be to have materials in the hands of some teachers to pilot that, and then to get, so kids would be under the curriculum we have now, and then come March or April, new textbooks would come into the hands of the teachers. They'd start incorporating that as part of their instruction, and then time for feedback before the school year ends.
I should say, in response to Mr. Lee's urging that we get on with this, we did look at an alternative timeline that was a little bit more leisurely and heading for 2016, and our view administratively was that we ought to try and do this by 2015.
My comment wasn't, Mr. Farmer, geared so much as get on with it. It was just to support the budget need, the
Right,
crunch,
I
that's
got-
all, to
I
be
got
behind
that.
it 100%.
Does anyone else have any further questions? Remember, this is a recommendation to approve a committee right now, and I'm assuming the committee will come back to us with their results. Could we have a motion to approve the establishment of a committee to review mathematics teaching materials and consideration of the funding implications within the development of the FY16 operating budget?
So moved.
Could we have a second, please? Any further discussion? All those in favor? Unanimous. Thank you very much. Is she welcome to stay?
Come and sit next to me here if you like. We'll go see your kids.
The next item on our agenda is to have a brief report from the people from the members of the committee who attended the MASC-MASS Joint Conference last week. So for Monique and Linda and Robin and myself, if we could start with Monique, if you have a few highlights you'd like to mention.
I have a couple that I found very interesting. One was called Panorama Education, and that Brian and I went to this. Panorama Education works with K through 12 districts nationwide to run surveys and data analytics programs. They develop programs for districts to measure topics such as social emotional learning, student and parent engagement, social climate, teaching and learning, and professional development. The Barnstable schools hired Panorama Education, and they spent $20,000, which I thought we agreed was a little bit of money for us. But they do provide sample surveys for student feedback, and we can get those for free. And the crowd was incredulous, but they said, we're trying to build up some business, so we'll give it to you for free. The surveys can be done online or on paper. They develop custom surveys for people, and they do all the analytics. So I know student feedback is going to be part of the student teacher evaluations at some point, so that's why there's interest in this. One thing that they did do that I thought was interesting is there was one school district that was talking about kids that are kind of lost in the shuffle, fall through the cracks, whatever terminology you want to use. And they had the staff put the names of all the kids in a certain grade, say on a smartboard or whatever, a blackboard or wall. And the faculty went around and circled all the kids that they had a connection with. And the kids that were left were the kids that they realized were not connected. And the faculty was, incredulous that, these were the kids, and they were able to identify them, and everybody knew who they were. So that's the kind of work that they do. Should I go on with just a couple more things, or am I taking up too much time?
If you think they're important, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I think you went to this too, Brian. The Kopelman and Page presented a couple of legal cases that they thought were important that districts should know about. And these cases were kind of complicated, so I'm not going to go over the complexity of this, but basically what they came out with was, this one involved Marshfield, and a teacher that had professional teacher status but did not have the right licensure. And he was terminated by the superintendent, but not by the deadline, and then he took a leave of absence. And it went to an arbitrator who held up that he was still employed by the district, and it was held up by an appeals court and a superior court. And this is what they said. They learned that lousy contract language is still binding. You can terminate someone for not having a license, but you have to follow the process. The district made a big mistake because they gave advice to the employee about how to get licensed, and they had given the employee the wrong advice. So the employee used this, in his argument about being unemployed. It is up to the employee, not the employer, to make sure that there are no gaps in licenses, and let the employees negotiate their licensure requirements with DESE. Districts should not give advice. And the other one that I thought was pretty interesting as well is, you probably read about it in the papers, this happened in Lexington. There was a teacher that was, I don't know what kind of teacher he was, history or physics, I can't remember, but he had been an employee for 11 years. He was an employee in good standing at the high school. And he had some bantering that went on that was sexual in nature. It was definitely inappropriate. And when he was dismissed, he said, I've got a good record and I've got good performance, and I apologize, I was wrong. And I can't remember if he saved his job, but I don't think he did. He was fired. Anyway, the case came down to, the district said he had behavior unbecoming a teacher, because a teacher has to rise to a certain standard. That should have been the end of the story. You were dismissed for being inappropriate, but the arbitrator ruled that he, had been inappropriate, but we should consider his previous behavior. And the court said, end of story. There's no arbitration. Once you decide that someone is not appropriate, they're inappropriate.
So I thought that was
And if-
pretty interesting.
That was actually one of my highlights, if I can just add on.
Yeah.
I think the key finding there is the arbitrator overruled the termination and changed
Yeah.
it to a 2-day suspension. And the SJC then found that an arbitrator doesn't have the right, once they agreed on the
Right.
finding of conduct unbecoming, that is where an arbitrator's responsibility ends, which Mike Long wasn't there, but his partner, Mary Ann DiPietro, and MASC's legal counsel, that's huge because we
Yeah.
have consistent issues with an arbitrator acting very differently than a judge. And there are many times we would like to see a judge and an arbitrator gets it, and it rarely goes the way you would think with using logic and reason, so.
I won't bore you with the rest of this, but I did go to a session on local mandates, how to petition the state auditor's office, which I thought was interesting. I didn't know all about, I knew McKinney-Vento we were bound by, but that was actually a voluntary agreement that the state made with the federal government, so it's not a local mandate. So anyway, that has to do with homeless transportation. And there was an appropriation to the states, but it's $4 million short for funding that. And then also I went to something that will help Brian about finances, stabilization funds, revolving accounts. I get it.
Good. Linda?
Oh, I had one more thing to say. They did warn us that student activity accounts should have close scrutiny because there's many hands in the till. Were you there when they said that? So we'll be talking about that, I'm sure.
Brown's on top of that, as he is on everything.
I went to I don't know, do you have to, is it okay for me to
Yeah,
talk?
go ahead.
I don't know if you had to. Yeah, I went on to a seminar on best practices and cost savings, and what I got out of that was he had these superintendents come up to explain what they did to create cost savings in their district. And as they went down everything that they did to make cost savings, I was checking off that we've done that, we've done that, we've done that. And out of this whole hour seminar that I went to, there wasn't one thing in that seminar that we haven't already turned the rock over on. So I thought that was pretty impressive. And this conference that we go to, some of the things are enlightening to us because we see just how far our district is in front of a lot of these other districts. I went on into another that talked about park and Common Core, and it was a 2-hour seminar on that. And the amount of pushback that the districts push onto the DESE and the BESE, trying to get them to change some of their mandates and some of their timelines. And I know Mr. Farmer has pushed back on even some of the deadlines that were set. So it was just amazing to see that our administrators are above the curve and know exactly what's going on with the park and the Common Core. And some of the districts have refused to go along with what the state has said, and our district hasn't. Our district has made sure that we've stayed in line with them, because I'm sure when all is said and done, a lot of those districts are going to be held accountable, and they're not going to be ready for the park when they say this is the way the park is going. And then I went on another one that was, it's a group of school committee members that are putting together, as well with some of the senators, to stop a lot of this testing that's been going on. And again, Mr. Farmer has spoken about it already tonight. And we have a policy group that's going to be doing more advocating for our district, and I've already taken down these people's names of us going to them and helping with the mandates and the tests that we don't want to have being done. We need to speak to when the park and the Common Core come, we just need to make sure we're letting parents know, and maybe even having a workshop for parents to see what their kids are being tested on, and making sure that our communities understand the importance of the park when it does become mandated to us, So those were the type of things that they were saying, that to get your community involved was to let them know and send home these types of exercises that our children are going to be seeing. So I just want to applaud the administration of how much further along in districts we are than other districts.
Robin?
Yeah, I'd like to reiterate what Linda said, that this conference serves as a real barometer for where we stand relative to other districts in the state. And I went, out of maybe 8 sessions I went to, at least 4 or 5 were very focused on budget development, implementation, watching the budget throughout the year, which is our fiduciary responsibility. And in many circumstances, I felt that our administration could have been putting on those presentations because, like Linda said, some of the things they were recommending, we've done them. How our budget reads, the summaries, the detail, the transparency. It made me proud. Can you always learn something? Of course, and I think we all learn a lot every time we go. Some of the things that I attended that were not just budget focused, one was really interesting. It was put on by the president of Teachers 21, John Doria, if I'm saying his name correctly. The title of the session was Inspiring Innovation and Creativity in a Time of High Accountability. And it really talked about innovative organizations and whether that is our school committee, our administration, our entire district, or teachers just within a classroom, the characteristics that really lead to innovation and success. And one of the things that he talked about was that in order for an organization to be able to innovate, and we certainly need to do that in today's world with high stakes and having to find a different way to do things, there were some key things that those organizations or groups or classrooms had to be comfortable with. One was not knowing the answers, not feeling like you have to be right about everything, asking for help, reporting mistakes, failing, disagreeing agreeably and respectfully. And as they were identifying these things, I kept thinking, this is the kind of stuff we teach our kids within a family, and yet sometimes as adults, we're just afraid to not be right or to be criticized by a member of the public or you got it wrong or whatever. But unless we can get rid of the I'm right, you're wrong mentality and kind of come together sharing different perspectives, we're really not going to move anything forward. We're not going to create safe learning environments. We're not going to learn ourselves and improve. So he was just very inspirational in his presentation. And one of the things he talked about was to have a growth mindset. It really requires a shift from, and I was thinking about the teacher evaluation because everybody's feeling like they've been teaching 30 years and all of a sudden they're being told that they have to prove they're doing a good job. And that's a challenge for everyone. But the shift was from proving you know something to improving what you know, going from demonstrating your skills to developing new skills, and then not thinking about being better than others, your peers, and how you relate to them, or whether you're a student or a teacher, but being better than you were in the past. And it was just a great perspective and outlook, and hopefully some of these, it's really about a culture, I guess, and how important that is to shift, to have everybody working together. I attended the same session that Monique did on the unfunded mandates. This is, presenters were from the state auditor's office, and they were basically identifying the fact that since Prop 2.5 came into effect in 1981, we're not allowed to go over this levy. Municipalities have a very difficult time raising more tax dollars, but we keep seeing new requirements come down from the state that are pushing us well beyond our 2.5 levy, whether it's on a municipal level or certainly the school district, which is eating up a big portion of the municipal budget. McKinney-Vento was definitely one that they identified as an unfunded mandate, and then were able to force the legislature to actually fund it, which they did properly 2 years ago, but not fully last year. But they did give us some ideas of other things to have on our radar that are these unfunded mandates that can put pressure on our budgets. One is the Chapter 222, which is requiring all districts to educate suspended or expelled students. And that can include residential situations and can become costly. I think the main thing we got out of this was that if we are dealing with expensive mandates, that we have an office to go to, and it is simply, and Mr. Farmer, I know you wrote a letter about, I think it was the fingerprinting that was an additional cost. The state has plenty of loopholes to get themselves out of having to fund these unfunded mandates, but there is an office that we can write to when we're seeing these increased costs, to at least have attorneys look at it to say, is this an unfunded mandate, and can they put pressure on the legislature? Finally, one that was different than everyone else had been to was test audits. And that is, are we looking at the frequency of our state mandated tests, whether there's duplication? And I was able to sit there and say, yes, our district has done that, and last year reviewing some of these. And but they also pose the question, do you have grading policies, which we are about to step into that and review that? And should we have a testing policy? It's worth asking the question. And, you know, there are different forms of testing. Obviously, you have the mandated, you know, grade-wide, MCAS, PARC, all of that. But then you have tests that teachers just give every day. And if there are 3 or 4 tests on a day, are we getting the results out of the kids that we want? So it was just one of those things that it's really about putting it on the radar and making districts aware of it. So I was pleased to say, well, we may not have a policy yet, but we are diving into the grading thing and perhaps should look at the testing as well.
I have Mary's feedback. Mary attended the workshop, but she's not able to be here tonight. And she, again, echoing what you've already heard, that we are, as far as public relations and raising the district profile in a competitive environment, we're already doing many of the ideas that were expressed in this session. Another one where she said something very similar was the best practices cost savings. I think in the last several years, every time someone goes to a workshop on that topic, we come back thinking that we're doing a really good job. Thank you very much to the administration. So those were her highlights. I have 3 printed pages from Mary if anybody would like a copy of the outline. I don't want to take up a lot of time. One of the ones I went to was a program on transitioning students who have been special needs students in high school and then into the 18 to 22-year-old program. And I've not talked to Mr. Farmer about this yet, but there were some very, very interesting things which we may or may not be doing, and I kind of would like to find that out myself before I get into that too much, because it was a very valuable program, a program that doesn't affect great numbers of students, but affects great numbers of dollars. And there was a workshop that was presented that was not on the original agenda, and Mr. Farmer went to one session on this, which was, I believe, superintendents. That was just superintendents, and I went to another one, same topic, different group. It was put on by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and I don't want to get into a lot of detail, but this is a very, very, very hot, controversial topic, and it involves tying teachers' licenses to the evaluation process. And there are all kinds of reasons why that is not a good idea, which, if anybody wants to know why, I'd be happy to talk to you. I'm sure Mr. Farmer would be happy to talk to you. But this was kind of an add-on, not on the agenda, but there had been enough controversy that it was made available, at least to some people. So, anyway, Brian, Christopher, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I will. One of the items I wanted to note was what Monique has already talked about with those cases, and the other was Robin's already referenced it, but it is good to hear that a lot of the practices we have in place are best practices, but also a couple takeaways on things that we, I think, can do as far as making our processes more transparent, is that we have, on a monthly basis, they kept talking about getting monthly reports, and it was shocking to me to hear committee members who maybe get annual reports, let alone quarterly reports, let alone monthly reports. And so you get general fund, you get revolving, you don't get grant expenditure reports. And quite honestly, there's not a whole lot exciting because a grant comes in, very specific purpose, it goes out and expended for a specific purpose. But I think it would be helpful in an overall transparency so that you can see tracking over the course of the year to also get a monthly expenditure report for grants. So I've already had some discussions with Lori Ziviak, our accountant, on how to format that so it's not a 20-page report with level of detail that you don't care to know, but something that's informative for you so you can see the progress. Also, we talked about, Christopher mentioned the student activity accounts. We've made significant changes over the past several years as far as the use of those accounts, and it's so that you are aware, everyone refers to that as the principal's checkbook. It's established by statute to allow activities that are generally being run outside the school day to be charged a fee. Students pay those fees or families pay those fees, fundraise, and then checks can be written out against those specific activities. It's pretty broad use. It's actually outside the confines of the administration. It's between the principal, the district treasurer, and the vendors. Obviously, we put confines and make sure that our principals, they're all bonded. They are well aware of what can and can't be. So we've changed practice significantly, and I'm very confident we're well in line. Now it's a matter of our records. We've just moved everyone over to QuickBooks, which just adds another level of reporting on a monthly basis from the principals and secretaries to the treasurer. So that's in process. And then also to review, and I don't know if there's sweeping changes that we would suggest, but I think with the finance subcommittee to talk about line item transfers. And by statute, only the school committee can transfer monies between lines. There's different practices. Christopher's talked about, in Gloucester, it was major lines. So we've always come to the committee if we're transferring money between 2,300 salary line or a personnel line and energy or utilities or facilities. We just haven't done that. Our budgets have gone well and we haven't had to. But I think even on a more granular basis, is there a process that we should employ? Should we update our policies to maybe do quarterly transfers if there are items, at least have it on the agenda so we can, again, all in the order of transparency, make sure that that's all out in the open. I think, and then I guess the other thing on transparency is, since I wasn't sitting at the table, I was one of the administrations who was also in support of the accelerated math adoption. I know I'm the bean counter and I get to be blamed all the time, but I'm in support of the advanced accelerated as well. I didn't learn that at the con.
Yes.
I had to, sorry.
No problem.
I've included mine in my report. So
Okay.
maybe
We still have, yes.
I'm sorry. I wanted to ask, Madam Chair, that in the course of our meeting, we have the chairperson's comments, and I'm just wondering if we could elaborate our meetings at some point to ask committee members if they have any positive observations that they'd like to share
Sure.
with the committee. So I'd like to take this opportunity. Obviously, I wasn't part of going to the MASC conference this year, but I do want to share with everyone that we had a French student at our house for 2 weeks, and it was very good. She was very bright and very good English-speaking individual. And of course, in my inimitable fashion, towards the end of our stay, we were comfortable with each other, and I started to ask her questions. And I asked, and I asked, and I asked. And what I learned was that her fellow French students that were here would do just about anything to come to Triton. And the reason why was, in France, they have large classes, 30 to 35. But that's not really the biggest reason why. The biggest reason why, she said, is the interaction between our students and our teachers. She said that the passion that our teachers show in the course of teaching was just, it was phenomenal. And that's what she said. And I just wanted to share that with the committee because I think it's important that the teachers here, and it's not just the 11th, 12th grade, my daughter Olivia's 11th grade, but this Guy D had to shadow my freshman daughter as well. So it was across all grades that we saw this passion, and I just wanted to kudos
Thank
to
you.
the teachers.
That's very good feedback. Thank you very much, Paul. We still have quite a bit to cover this evening, so let's go. district dashboard.
This is presented for information. It gives you the latest figures that we have, either from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, where they are the primary source, or our October 1st response to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. In terms of the inputs, if you see something which is yellow, it means it's going the wrong way. If it's blue, it's going the right way. I'm on Annex 10 now, which should be page 33 in your packet. So up top, if it's yellow, it's going the wrong way. If it's blue, it's going the right way. Many of these changes are marginal, that from year to year, and really year-to-year changes, I think, don't tell you a lot. We really need 3-year, 4-year trends. In terms of the outcomes, blue is going in the right direction. The kind of I'm not sure what color it is. It's a kind of orangey red color. Beige, is it? It's a reddish beige. You've got data there in terms of student outcomes. And again, where we have figures which are comparable with the state, you have that information as well. You then have reminders of what some of the acronyms CPI and PPI mean and how they're calculated. At the end, I've added some comparative data with other districts in the area. Triton's at the top. Ignore the yellow. On our expenditure per pupil, the median is actually Danvers at 12,923. You'll see that all the schools listed here are level 2. The only schools locally are the charter school, where some of the data is not reported. The other would be Whittier Technical and Vocational High School. So for information, you've got some comparative data here. I'll remind you that as far as the median student growth percentile is concerned, 40 to 60 is regarded as moderate, acceptable growth, and we're trying to hit 55, the upper quartile of that range. We didn't do quite as well this year. We were 55 and I think 54, 56 and 55 last year. So there's some reduction there. And at the bottom you'll see there's a negative correlation between all student PPI score and percentage of high need students. That 0.729 means that it's essentially a 99% confidence level that this is not a chance correlation. So this here for your information. The really good news, if I just point one thing out, if you look at school choice in the middle of the inputs, you'll see that the latest DESE figures show 125 and a bit out and nearly 179 in. That's a much improved delta.
Any questions on the district at a glance?
Just a statement. I was absolutely stunned to see that the high needs population statewide is almost 49%. That's just mind-boggling that half of the students in this state fall into the high needs.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? Okay. Moving along to the DESE district. I learned that we call it DESE. I learned that at the conference last week.
They call it DESE, yes.
The DESE district analysis and review tools.
I included this with a link on your agenda, just to draw your attention to the fact that there is this facility on the DESE website. You'll see they have a rather curious list of districts which they think are like Triton. None of them really feel much like, as far as I'm concerned, as a relative newcomer to the northeast. But you can go into there and see quite a lot of comparative data in terms of how we're doing against other districts. So this is really just for information to maybe encourage you to have a look at that link as you doing your own research. That's all I have on that.
Questions on the DESI review? All right. And now, stadium redevelopment. We are to receive an update on the project, specifically the bleachers and amenities facilities. And we are going to be asked to approve the scope of the project as a whole, the development timeline, and the type of playing surface.
This is the assistant superintendent show.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
We had a meeting earlier today, 1 o'clock to about 3 o'clock. But since then, Brian has been kind of working on how we best present that, and here he goes.
So why don't we start with, there's a blue PowerPoint packet that was actually developed by Gail. And before we get into any of the stadium discussions, the figures, the first topic that has been discussed quite significantly is the request locally to review, should we be going synthetic or should we be looking at a natural turf field? So we asked Gail, and Gail would have done it anyway, they do this as part of their analysis, is to take a look at a net present value, NPV, which is an economic term that's used, very standard calculations to take a look at the cost of each of them over a 4-year, a 28-year period, and in today's dollars, how do they compare? So they've set this out as 2 courses of action. The first course of action is to replace the existing field, which is natural turf, with a new natural turf field. They did it assuming the most cost-effective way, which is actually to seed. Obviously, when you sod, you are going to incur significantly more costs. But let me just take you through, and obviously the second course of action is a synthetic field. So the first course of action, starting on page 1, it's reconstructing the existing natural turf field. It assumes all the existing in situ materials. They would have to supplement the topsoil, new irrigation system, and then a premium athletic seed. The cost there would be about $350,000 for the actual field replacement. The assumption would be we would lose about two years worth of seasons, definitely a year and a half, but for round figures, you assume the loss of 2 years worth of use during the grow-in period, which is just the actual grow-in, and then the following year to actually allow the roots to stabilize. At this point, they would assume and recommend that every 6 years, there would be a pretty aggressive renovation of that field. It would likely mean cutting probably right down the middle and resodding where all those high traffic for football in front of the goalposts, where the soccer would be, the corners. And they assume every 6 years about a $40,000 cost to do those repairs. And again, this is assuming a natural turf field and to keep it up so that it would be something that we would want to be using routinely.
Brian, would you lose 2 years of use again when you refurbish it?
Probably not, because at that point it's assumed we'd be doing sod, so it would not be. That's a great question. Currently, on the back of the front page, I double-sided, I like to save money. On the back of that page, we have our current costs for maintaining the existing field. Mowing, about $7,500 a year. Annual sod repairs, we spend about $2,500. And again, that's very minor. Irrigation, winterizing and dewinterizing, that also assumes some repairs. I don't know about your irrigation system, but rarely do they make it through the winter without some repair needed. 4 times a year, fertilizer and weed control. We aerate, top dress, and overseed a few times over the course of the year, 8,100. And then line markings for sports. It's technically 5 if boys lacrosse and girls lacrosse is actually different stripings, but the total cost is about $10,000 for the line painting annually. So the cost assumed in this analysis is $32,100 for annual maintenance costs on the existing field. The assumption is we would obviously continue to need to do that on a new field as well. The second course of action, is to construct a replacement synthetic. It's filled turf. Again, the filling is a whole separate another discussion and debate. It's assuming standard installation by an industry leader, whether we're talking about, I'm not even going to get all the names, but it's a tufted fiber. Regardless of the infill, there are certainly, we've talked about the crumb rubber infill versus a natural infill versus a EPDM infill. Anything outside of the crumb rubber would be an upcharge, anywhere from $175,000 to $250,000 just for the infill. But this is assuming a standard top of the line field turf. I mean, is the name you hear all the time. Filled turf field. It does come with an 8-year warranty. The latest thinking on the newest. A lot of the research we've read talks about older products, 07, 09. The newest assumption is that they'll get a solid 14-year life out of the carpet, which is, again, the fibers. The cost would be $850,000. There would be no loss of use. Obviously, you put the synthetic field in, the day they finish it, you could have 24 hours worth of practices on it without an issue. The replacement of the carpet, as we've talked about every 14 years. The annual maintenance is about $1,500. The assumption for the maintenance is using existing custodial staff. The field comes with, obviously we're buying it, a groomer that is put on the back of a gator, which we do have. This is really the cost of extra infill, and it's the entire field is groomed half a dozen times a year, but routinely you're replacing the infill down the center line, soccer season in front of the goals, corners, so those high need areas. So that's really the assumption of those materials, and it would be our normal labor that would be conducting that. So over the next page, again, we're getting into equating the NPV, which NPV actually, it's assuming an interest rate of 3%, but you have to understand an NPV, they're taking those dollars in the future and rolling it back to this year's dollars, so it's actually kind of a negative interest, if you will. So you can see the timetable across the top. $350,000 year one, $20,000 incurred for years 1 and 2 for loss of field. We're going to spend $40,000 at year 6. We're going to spend $40,000 at year 12 for those major renovations, and we're still going to assume roughly $32,100 a year each year of the 14 years. So down below, you take the $350,000. That's in today's dollars, and then you take the $32,100, and rather than multiplying it by 14, you're multiplying it by 11.296. Again, we're kind of depreciating. 20,000. It's 2 times, but it's not fully 2 times because we're depreciating back to this year's dollars. 40,000 at year 6 depreciated, and 40,000 at year 12 depreciated. So they come up with a net present value of $812,224. That's the 14-year costs in today's dollars for a natural turf field. Okay? Flip over the page. Now the NPV for a synthetic field. We've got obviously a much more significant upfront cost of $850,000. At year 14, at 14 times we're going to spend the $1,500 a year. And again, we're doing just the 14-year cycle, so we haven't replaced the carpet. So in the first 14 years, the cost is $866,944. You go over the page, 2 more, and I'll stop boring you. Same exact calculation, we're taking it out 28 years, which on a synthetic field is 2 life cycles of the carpet. So over the course of a 28-year life cycle, the natural turf field costs $1,090,000. Flip over the page on that same 28-year life cycle. Now it's basically, we've doubled the 14 years, but we've added in that carpet replacement of $400,000 halfway through that cycle. So we've got the initial cost, the annual $1,500, and then the $400,000. So we come up to $1.14 million as a 28-year net present value cost. So now the most important slide, but I wanted to make sure you at least understood how we arrived at the back slide. On a 14-year cost analysis, for the course of action 1, which again is a natural turf field, it's $812,224. On a synthetic, $866,944. Rough figures, we'll call it $50,000 less costly to put a natural turf field. If, however, we put that up against the use, and we assume in the next also where it says cost per use, 812, 224 divided by 295 uses, that is aggressive. We probably hold more like 185 to 200 games in the stadium, and there are some practices. That 295 is pretty aggressive. It would likely be lower than that, but you know, for the comparison, it's better to keep it high. That assumes that it comes out to $196 per use. On the synthetic field, we can obviously do many more, have many more uses. 650 uses, we get $95 a use. Quite honestly, I think Sean said today, there's plenty of fields that get 750, 790 uses a year. When it's all about how quickly you can turn it over. And a use is assumed as a game, so a couple hours. So if you're going to have a practice for a couple hours and then a game for a couple hours and then rent it out for a soccer tournament on Saturday, that may be multiple uses. So that's how we get so many uses. Obviously, there are only 365 days in a year. Taking that same analysis over 28 years, we come out with, again, the 1.09, so 1,090,000 on the natural and 1,140,000 on the synthetic. And then we have a per use cost of $131 on the natural and a per use cost of $62 on the synthetic. So the bullets down below, up front we pay at least 2 times as much to do the synthetic. The life cycle costs, if you look at just the life cycle costs, favor natural slightly, call it 50,000. Our primary purpose has been we want to A, increase revenue potential, and B, increase the ability for use. Then the synthetic is going to win hands down, because when you look at it as a per use, you have a significant uptick in the amount of use that we are able to achieve. So what this does not consider, this does not assume, this isn't even a bullet, this doesn't assume any revenue offsets. So if we're generating 40,000, conservatively 40,000 a year, 50,000, 100,000 a year in revenues, would have to be netted off these annual costs, which at that point then I would be hard pressed to agree with an argument that people are going to A, want to rent our natural turf fields, and B, if those fields are so nice that people want to rent them, we're not going to want to rent them because they won't be so nice anymore. So that doesn't even consider the revenue, but it also doesn't consider that fourth bullet down, doesn't consider maintenance savings for the other fields, because those uses, if we're able to have 700 uses on the stadium field, all of those uses are coming off of our existing fields, and we can start to kind of intermittently pay attention to the other fields that need work as well. So that was the first discussion was, and it's something we need to decide tonight, and I'll go over the milestone schedule really briefly. We need to make a decision tonight about, are we still keeping the same course of action? Bad choice of words. Are we still keeping the same plan here as far as a synthetic field with the amenities building, with the track, or are we shifting focus? If we assume that we're going to stay with a synthetic field, we do not have to make the decision tonight about what we fill it with, whether it's crumb rubber or corn husks or crushed walnut shells or Nike grind. Whatever it is we fill it with, that's a decision that would happen we would need that by the time we go out to bid. Newburyport is currently having this debate. They are going out to bid this winter. So we get to sit back and watch a little bit if we decide to go synthetic. So that was the first question that I know was raised, and we wanted to address that. I'm certainly happy to answer any questions before I go further if people have them. Yes.
Will the fill that we pick, will that change the price at all?
Significantly.
Some fills, I know people don't like, and I've read something about it. I'm not an expert on this.
Nope.
I don't even
Nor am I.
know what I'm talking about, but I know there's a lot of concern about it, about lymphoma and carcinogens and things like that. How will we know? Who's going to investigate this?
So I believe in the words of Sean Boyd, who's the engineer today, the reality is at one point in time, asbestos was a viable product. with the research we had at that point, that was a viable product. We now know it wasn't, and it's being rectified. At this point in time, the research isn't convincing that it is an issue. There are certainly issues that have been raised, and I know there's been a lot of Dina, Little Miss Data.
I will be Dina as soon as you're ready.
Okay. There's lots of information she's found. You can Google this, and it's. I'm not going to make a judgment. Is it propaganda? Is it hyping something that doesn't need to be hyped? I don't know. I'm not an expert either. The reality is, there is no conclusive evidence that I can. This is my opinion. There's no conclusive evidence to say that it is a problem. There are certainly concerning factors. That said, that has to be weighed up against. We talked about a few of the different infills, but some of the natural infills include cork, which obviously, if you're going to fill it with crushed cork, you're significant premium. The others that are most common, there was one. The only one that's not crumb rubber in this area, it's a W. Wellesley, I think it was Wellesley. They used an EPDM, which is basically the membranes that we would use on a roof, but the product is designed specifically to be ground as an infill. You hear about Nike Grind, which is used soles. That would be an EPDM product. Obviously, if that rubber is being produced for a purpose that would be, as human clothing, there's going to be different standards. The premium on the price is between $175 and upwards of $300,000+ to go from a ground crumb rubber, if you will, which is ground tires, to one of those premium infills.
It would be significant.
It will be significant. I mean, it'll be a couple $100,000. And Sean was saying today that, and I'm going to blank on where they just literally commissioned a field, the manufacturer of the crumb rubber actually produced a document showing that it is safe, and documented on company letterhead saying that this, at least they're saying that they're standing by their product.
Well, this
It
could
is
be
ground
$1 million.
tires.
$100,000. Is this $850,000 predicated on the most expensive fill?
No, that is assuming crumb rubber infill.
So it could be $1 million project.
Yes, it would be over $1 million. It absolutely would be over $1 million if we did a alternative infill. Which again, we don't have to decide tonight. We have to decide, do we want to go natural or synthetic? Because we go from this point, you're going to see you have in front of you what are called schematic design and budget. So call it like 25%. We then move quickly to 50% design, 90% design. So by the time we come back in January, you are deciding on a final design to say, this is the design, the budget we want. Because at that point, they go full court press for 3 months in the zoning, permitting, into getting everything done to get ready to bid.
I think one thing worth thinking about is that some of the media reports have come out of a lady finding female soccer goalkeepers. Well, goalkeepers stay on their feet as far as they can, because when they're on the ground, they're out of the game. If you watch them performing, they get back on their feet as quickly as they can. I would think that the typical football running back spends far more time with their face down in the dirt than somebody who is a soccer goalkeeper. The other thing that interests me is that I've been to two turf fields recently, and the one we were at on Monday, where the girls played at Manning Field, the surface was very, very tight. It would have probably pretty acceptable field hockey surface. I saw very little rubber crumb coming up, as compared with North Reading, where I did see some, but I don't think it was that there was a lot. The other thing is that the press talks about girls having stuff all over their things. Well, have a shower. I don't know. People go home in their kit. I used to have a shower after a game, which I think is actually quite hygienic. So I think there are ways in which we can accommodate some of these concerns, but there's no scientific evidence that would suggest that there should be concern. Is there some concern in some quarters? Sure. But whether there's anything that would convince a jury to say this is unhealthy. And the various Centre for Disease Control and the EPA do not appear to be concerned about the problems which have been described, because they could have other things in common besides playing on artificial turf.
Paul?
Brian, I just have a question. On the course of action 1, the existing field reconstruction, in year 1 and year 2, you have a $20,000 charge, and that's called loss of use, I guess?
Yep.
What does that mean? To pay to go elsewhere?
Because we would not be able to be on the fields. We literally would have to be renting space on other schools' fields to conduct our games, as well as the biggest cost there would be transportation. Yep.
We did talk about sodding it, and it would be very, very much more expensive.
I think I know. I know that Robin has some research that she would like to summarize, and then I have too, regarding the crumb rubber.
Well, we've definitely received some input from members of the community to say, please, look at all the alternatives. And I think we really have done that. I think that since our last meeting, we definitely wanted to explore the possibilities of natural and what those costs would be. Of course, the scare over the possible carcinogens and lymphoma and all that was another issue. It's hot in the news. And so, I have been reading for the last 2 days, researching the research that is available. And I can read the names of a few studies. It seems like once you start getting into this, everybody starts citing some of the major studies that have been done on this topic. And with regard to, health concerns, it's either from inhaling it, swallowing it, just the fumes, whatever. And the research seems to indicate that there is no higher risk, health risk, playing on a turf field from the standpoint of health concerns other than abrasions. They talk about the turf burn and all that, and you probably are going to have more abrasions on that surface. People also brought up the concept of bacteria and things, and the idea of possibly having to clean the synthetic turf, and the studies seem to indicate there's a much lower occurrence of bacteria and streptococcus on synthetic versus natural turf. And part of it is it's a plastic surface. It's not a living host for a bacteria. Heat is another one of the things that can be a concern with the synthetic turf. And I think that as I've gone through this whole thing, as I've been weighing natural turf versus synthetic turf, I think we have to consider climate. We have to consider cost of installation and maintenance. We have to consider the usability, the frequency of it. What are the risk factors? And I'll get back to those research in a second. The potential rental income, and the fact that we are surrounded by all other natural turf fields here at Triton. So we're talking about diversifying, I guess. The heat issue, I think, might be an issue in Arizona or other places, but let's face it, from September to June, I think we would welcome warmer playing surfaces. I know that you have hot days, but it's not the risk of it being 100 degrees on the field and feeling like 140 if you were playing in Arizona or something like that. We also don't have a great climate like Southern California that could sustain a beautiful natural field without excessive rain and reducing the usability and all those kinds of things. The risk factors with regard to health, I'm just not convinced there is a risk factor. There have been studies done by the California Environmental Protection Agency Office of Environmental Health and Hazard Assessment, the Norwegian Institute of Public Health. Penn State did an exhaustive research on a lot of these different studies, and the results continue to be that there seems to be no greater health risk to anybody playing on these surfaces than normal environmental exposure to anything just walking around on your city's streets. I certainly wouldn't want to put anything out there that increased anybody's risk of anything. But you put your kid on a field out there and they have a risk of a head injury. If we're going to be paralyzed and not move forward because there is the slightest risk or there's risks all over life. But after reading for several days, lots of different websites, I'm not convinced that we should steer away from synthetic because of fears of the crumb rubber infill. That's just my opinion after doing my own research.
I have, this is a combination of what I found out and what Dina found out. This is Dina's, if anybody would like to look at it. That's what she printed out. I talked to the head athletic trainer at Governor's Academy. They have both natural and artificial turf fields, and I asked him what his opinion was, and he said without any hesitation, if he were building a new field, he would go with artificial turf. And he listed all of the reasons that we already have heard, but in addition to that, he said he did not see any difference in injury from artificial to natural turf. He did not think that and he's the athletic trainer, so he would be the one that would get the injury people right away. He said that was not the case in his experience. And what Robin had said, the most negative report that Dina found came from Spain. It wasn't anything that it was very similar to some of the things we've heard, but that was from Spain. Something called Chemosphere. The Societies for Risk Analysis, who else did I see? The EPA in 2009, the Connecticut Department of Health, those all came out with neutral or positive, no negative effects. And just to kind of expand, Robin mentioned the Norwegian Institute of Public Health, and specifically, they checked for oral, inhalation, and skin absorptions. They checked for those 3 ways from people playing on crumb rubber, and they also checked all age groups, from young children right through adults. The Norwegian Institute of Public Health. That was the most thorough that I saw in these materials. And again, to echo what Robin said, there was no greater risk than there would be in any other environmental issue. Paul, do you have any question or comment?
Ms. Farmer, I just have a question. Your observation about a tight field and then North Reading, where you said if somebody went down, something came up, is that because of the age of it, because North Reading has an older field, or is it the carpet they're putting on? Or?
No, I think actually the Manning Field was done around 2008, and North Reading is very recent. I think it's just a slight difference in the simulated grass. The Manning Field, it's very dense, looks more like a golf fairway than the kind of slightly wavy grass that seems to be typical.
Robin, I just have a question.
Yeah.
In the course of your research, did you come across anything, and this is something I've seen, but some communities are actually putting playing fields on top of landfills, and I've seen that a couple times. Did you see any correlation between soccer fields that are on top of landfills?
I didn't, but one negative, there were some lead issues, and I think there was a study in New Jersey where they found 2 fields, and I don't recall it being associated at all with a landfill, but that was the one other thing that came up as a health hazard, not just a carcinogen effect, but the lead. And both of those fields were found to be in existence well beyond their life expectancy, and they were beginning to turn to dust, and they were older fields that were made of a nylon product that when it broke down did have lead in it, and we're not talking, it was beyond its life expectancy, and it was a different product than what we're looking at. But no, nothing specific about a landfill.
Brian, would you like to go over the timeline?
Absolutely. So the other documents that you have in front of you, before we go over the timeline, you've got a larger, what is this, 11 by 17, that has 3 pages. The top page is the existing map, so it's an existing conditions plan. The next page is what is being proposed. And I'll just leave it on that second page just for a moment, just to briefly talk about what has changed over the course of the last several months. As far as the major structure of the overall stadium, it has not changed. It is still a 6-lane oval. It is an 8-lane straight. We're looking at a 15-seat grandstand.
1,500.
1,500, yes. We're hoping at least 20 or 30 people show up, give or take. I round down. So if one of the big things that changed when they mapped the wetlands, and if you look on this plot, if you look, there's a dotted line. You can see on the top, you can see there's those tight dotted lines, which is elevation. There's a 20-foot or so drop from the playing field down into the marsh. You wouldn't know it looking out there, but it's a precipitous drop. There's a heavy dotted line kind of right along the top, and it goes across the track, and then one a little farther down that kind of goes right almost along the edge of the football playing field and then wraps around. That's the 100, the buffer, basically the buffer zone that we have to, anything within that 100-foot buffer is much more difficult to accomplish. Not that it's not able to be done, but we obviously have to be a little more careful, and so the planning is a little greater. So over the course of this, there's been an uptick in the price, and it's had largely to do with the existing soil conditions, finding construction debris buried 4 feet down where the amenities building will be. Some of the existing, there were test pits dug at the 50-yard line in each D zone, as well as borings that are suggesting that they wanted to put some contingencies. Again, this is the concept is every time they revise, it's to take it to the high water mark, and hopefully we refine down. Another big contingency that wasn't known is if you look right across the top of the track on the outside, there's a 4-foot pedestrian walkway paved all the way around the track, and then there's a 4-foot pedestrian fence it's 1 meter from the outside lane of the track. You can see a dark line that kind of goes across the entirety of the top of that track. That's actually a retaining wall that's going to need to be built, and it's actually at its highest point is going to be 6 feet. So there's significantly more earthwork, if you will, significantly more erosion control and retention that was initially anticipated. We also, one of the designs was to shrink back to a longer and narrower track like we have now. But part of the impetus to have this new synthetic field that is so desirable is to have a full 210-foot across soccer field. So it's in order to do that, you'll notice that it actually is, we're pushing up pretty close to even the tennis courts that exist now. But so as far as the overall design of the stadium, there have been no major changes. There's been costs assumed increasing because of, like I said, the retention wall in those areas. We also have a plan now to bring in, if you look on the bottom right, the pole vault, the shot put is now down on the bottom right. High jump is in the right D zone, long jump and triple jump in the left D zone, and then you can actually see there's a shot put cage. I'm sorry, a discus cage and field that would be assumed in the main field. The other major cost increase is in the amenities building. The initial design was, early on we were hoping we could get a waiver from the number of toilet fixtures that we are required. The design that you have a picture of, I believe, has 12 female fixtures and 7 or 8 male fixtures. That's a 50% waiver, which means for a 1,500 seat bleacher system, we would be required to have 24 female fixtures, and I believe it's 14 or 16 male fixtures. They said we'd almost guarantee that we could get a 50% waiver. Beyond that, it's possible, but it's highly unlikely because we're containing the entire stadium in. Obviously, that has significant rental implications as far as revenues. It allows us to hold MIAA events. It allows us to hold band competitions and be a much more desirable location. So the amenities building, at this point, we had assumed, we carried a figure of 400,000. That would, I believe today we arrived at, that would just barely provide the bathrooms. Beyond that, there was an assumption of there was some need as far as storage. People want to talk about the ticket booth, secure ticket booth, concessions, and then we don't have a team room, so that at this point, at halftime, take football for example, you notice the football team goes into the cafeteria. The opposing team, we open up the middle school hallway and they hang out in the hallway, which isn't ideal. The addition of a team room would allow either our team or the opposing team to have a space in this building. Again, it's a shell of a room. And then the other team could use the cafeteria. So if you look at somewhere, so you have another sheet that looks like this. It says Gale Associates. We have not arrived at a final design by any stretch of the imagination. Basically, today we agreed that we want to talk about a simple cinder block construction building, and we arrived at, rather than going traditional, we want to look more towards something that matches the architecture of the existing structure. So this is again, the other major cost increase, is this amenities building. And if you're looking at this sheet, it lines up just like that over it. So you've got women's and men's room on the left. It's actually a covered walkthrough, so the only entrance into the stadium, unless you're going way down to the left, which would be the emergency, which would be large enough for an ambulance, the only entrance into the stadium would be through this covered center of the building. So to the left would be the restrooms, to the right would be a ticket booth, some semblance of a concession stand, obviously some utility and some storage space, and then the team room you see in the top right corner. We talked about moving he was getting his details, talking about where they would use the grills. The idea for a concession stand is not a full, you could easily spend $1 million on a concession stand if we start talking about, I mean, popcorn machines and grills and refrigerators. I mean, you're talking about setting up a restaurant. So this is a very basic shell of a space. We would continue to use the grills like the boosters do now. So this is long from any kind of finalized design, but this is kind of the thinking where we're at right now. This building has a price tag of about $800,000, $797,500, I believe is the exact figure. I believe that that's a conservative figure in that it likely could be done cheaper than that, but again, look at the worst case scenario. So I think I've hit everything in regards to what has changed from the initial design you saw to what we're looking at today. And again, this is being driven by the existing conditions that were discovered as we've done the investigations, and then B, in an amenities building that's solving, rather than spending $400,000 on just bathrooms, by doubling that we gain, obviously it's I think a beautiful entry regardless of what the building looks like. The security of having all the entrance go right through the building is nice, as well as providing the concession and ticket booths where we've got people working in a garage that's semi-falling down the other end of the field. A ticket booth that can be secured and locked in this building. So those are the major changes. This is the detailed cost if you care to look over it. The other document, before I look at the milestone, is a document that should look familiar. It now has a red revised badge at the top. Nothing changed on the front, because as far as we're concerned, the project is still the same as far as the details. However, over the page, I added some detail, and it's now called the schematic design estimated costs. And you can see we're now up to $3,978,660. That's the total cost. That's about roughly $800,000 more. About 400 and change was the changes in the actual field. Everything from, I should also mention, these figures were adjusted by Gale based on bids they just opened this fall. So these are real-time dollars. However, I believe it was stated off the cuff that one contractor submitted a bid and actually padded it by $40,000 because they didn't need the work. and it was a competitive bid. So, I mean, at this time of the game when people are so busy, this isn't the good time to bid. So, and again, they've said this numerous times, these are conservative numbers. We will likely, if we're bidding this out, we would, according to the milestone schedule in the spring, late winter, early spring, we would likely see more favorable numbers. But again, we want to assume the highest water level. So again, we were talking earlier down the bottom, an institution for savings donation of $525. The TEF funds raised, it said 100. It's actually just shy of 110,000 right now, and then 175,000 used out of gate receipts. We'd be bonding 3.168 rather than we were assuming 2.335. So at 2.335, we were, if we, and again, I'm not making any proposal here, if we, whether we did a divide by 3 or did it assessed the capital each year based on enrollment. If we divided by 3, we were looking in the low 60s. This is now in the very low 90s per town, or you can see the variation if we did it on foundation enrollment. So I'm fairly confident that the number will be lower. One of the red items in italices is there are several other private donations that have been, some have been confirmed, some have been hinted. Some of the confirmed donations were in kind that I haven't factored in because I'm not sure how they can factor in yet, because when you have a contractor, the stadium, the amenities building is a Chapter 149 called vertical construction. That will be bid separately. That has what's called filed sub-bidders. So we get to see each sub-bidder for the concrete work, for the framing, for the everything. We see those separately. Everything else is one lump sum bid. So someone can't bid on just the concrete pilings for the bleachers and the concrete nailer. It's one massive sub-bid. So what we want is when this project is done to have one person who's completely liable for that stadium, and that's the general contractor. If we introduce an in-kind service in there, that gives the GC an opportunity to say, no, it was him, her. It wasn't me, and then we have issues. So I'm confident that there are additional, whether in-kind or monetary donations, that are going to drive this cost down a little more. But as it stands today, this is what is committed and confirmed. Any questions on that? So then the final updated document is a revised milestone. So it's expanded a little, trying to add some detail, and actually the one that was in your packet, I've changed it slightly by a couple dates. So on September 17th, we had the meeting with the towns. There was general consensus that this was a need and we should move forward. That contract was signed with Gale on the 25th of September. The site assessment survey and soil investigation was done, by the end of October. Programming meetings have been ongoing. We've met 3 or 4 times now. As of today, the schematic design and budget, we received this about 2 o'clock, and you now have it in your hands. Tonight, again, we need to agree at a schematic level. I guess the only real questions are, the amenities building has changed. Are we still staying on course with that? And natural versus synthetic. Those are the two, again, not infill if you choose synthetic, but just natural versus synthetic. From there, we go quickly. The 50% design takes these and further refines by December 1st. By December 19th, so before the Christmas holiday, we'll be at 90%. When we come back over the new year, there was a discussion to schedule a meeting in very early January, a special, oh no, that's actually the regular school committee meeting, isn't it? Maybe not. I don't remember. Because we start the budget meetings the following week. But to have a meeting on January 7th to agree a final, and I think the discussion at the table was to have a special, separate, and dedicated meeting of the school committee to say, here's what we're doing. And it would be similar to what you have now, but with greater detail. Obviously, the documents, they would be building elevations, it would be in significantly more detail by that January 7th date to proceed formally. From that point, January through March, permitting gets very aggressive. Construction documents are completed by the 25th of March. Remember, there's a discussion that the committee votes to incur the debt. Within 60 days, the towns have the ability to meet and say no. They don't have to say yes. And if there's no vote yes, it's an affirmative vote. But they have the ability to say no. So we obviously want to work with the towns and make sure that aligns with town meetings. So if the vote happens on March 25th, we will have the construction documents complete. We will have much more refined, we will not have bid it yet, but we'll have much more refined numbers at that point. So again, the vote to incur debt would be the maximum amount we would potentially borrow. That doesn't mean we would ever borrow the full amount. It's the maximum amount. We then, through our treasurer, certify that amount to the towns. We put the project out to bid basically late March through late April. The filed sub-bid opening, April 15th, is for the building. The track and field bid opening is the rest of the entire stadium. And then the building, you see this filed sub-bids are for the structure, and then the major building bid opening is on the 24th. The following week, or the week of the 24th, we would review all the bids. We would come to you on April 29th with the bid in hand that we are suggesting you vote to award the contract to. So that, again, we would have provided documents to the towns back in March. Obviously, for the warrants, February, March, they're needing figures to produce the warrants. But we would be going to the town meetings with a bid that was voted by you to award, with obviously very hard figures. Town meetings would occur between May 4th, I think the earliest is the 4th, latest is the 19th. Following that meeting, we would execute, assuming you voted to, on the 29th, to approve the award of the contract. Once the three towns take action, we would award the contract on May 20th. We would initiate the bond process on May 20th. The bonding, again, that can happen in conjunction with the start of the construction. May 25th, we'd have a pre-construction conference, and by June 1st, we would be kicking off the construction in that stadium. It would likely be wrapped up by September 14th for substantial completion of the track and field. So you can see field beneficial occupancy. We can basically be in there on the field likely on September 1st. Track and field substantial completion the 14th. The surface on the track is done. September 30th, it's literally ready to turn over the keys. And then on September 30th, the building, the amenities building would lag behind a little bit. There's a longer construction period. Substantial completion on the 30th of September, and the final completion by middle October. So it's an aggressive schedule, but every time we've met, we've pushed, and it's completely doable. Obviously, there are some key timelines and some key benchmarks that need to be hit in there. And this is assuming everything goes smoothly through the whole design and the permitting process as well. We have started discussions with the town of Newbury. Sean Boyd from Gale Associates has reached out to Doug Packer and working through Chris Walsh. So those discussions have started. We did file a capital plan document with the town of Newbury to make sure that everything that is necessary is being done. Sorry.
Dick?
We hadn't ever agreed on an actual design for the amenities building. So we initially in the design, go back a year plus when we were working with TEF, we were assuming we could get away without an amenities building. They were granting waivers enough that we could hopefully use the outbuilding, single stall, male and female, and the middle school lobby. So during the course of transitioning from a private project into a public project, we realized that's not going to happen anymore. We're going to have to. So there was a figure Gail has used figures of 800,000, a million, $1.2 million. We put in a placeholder. I chose that 400,000, and it was clearly the wrong figure to put in as a placeholder. That would get us at a minimum the restrooms. So then the question is there enough of a value in the rest of the building as designed now to warrant the additional 400,000? That's actually, these are all Gale Associates documents. That was actually, Sean wrote that this morning. So if you look on the not the schematic of the field, but the building, you see it says Gale Associates and it says S3 Design. A gentleman by the name of Sal is the architect that they're contracting with because they're so busy, so they use them. So that was a misconnection between Sean and Sal, that they were working on different figures. And the reality is, I mean, there's lots of things that we could talk about. We could talk about prefab buildings. We could talk about pre-engineered steel. There's a lot of other options along the way that we could discuss.
I mean, this amenities building has no heating in it.
Can you use the microphone, Dick? Excuse me, can you use the microphone?
I was just concerned about the jump in the price, that's all.
If you compare the revised cost to Gloucester, Gloucester has a substantial concession stand, but it had to put restroom facilities in. If you take the 400 out for the amenities side, other than restrooms, the figures are broadly comparable. No, we could take in industrial heaters if we really needed to take the chill off, or to protect the plumbing over a short snap.
I was just thinking about the concessions building, people standing around. And is there no refrigeration then? Or?
Oh, no, there's electricity. It's just not heated. So as soon as you heat, so if we were going to do a cinder block construction, as soon as you heat, you have to double the walls, insulate. So this would probably be a $1.1 million building if we insulated and heated it.
Monique?
Brian, this 800,000 for the amenities building, that's predicated on getting a waiver on the bathrooms?
Correct.
So if you get bathrooms, how much will the cost, if you have to put in 28 ladies' bathrooms, how much will it change the cost?
Well, it's 375, 470, 450 to 475 a square foot for restrooms. Then, you know, like the team room, I think he said the cost per square foot is more like $105, $110 a square foot. So if the restrooms as you see them, if they were a standalone building, that would be about 400,000. So if they didn't give us a waiver and we had to double the stalls, call it the same $800,000. They're fairly confident we would get the waiver of 50%. And there's a possibility that we could get the waiver reduced even further. They're not confident in that at all. It's happened more in the past. In the recent past, it's not. They've not been as successful, and the state has clamped down on that.
Just as a reminder, tonight what we need to do is approve the scope of the project as a whole, the development timeline, and the type of playing surface. Does anyone have any questions regarding any of those three areas? Paul?
Are we able to ask questions about the pricing?
Sure.
So, Brian, on this plan from Gale Associates, the plan itself shows a 4-foot wide by 2 minutes concrete walkway, yet the literature says 5 feet. And I'm just wondering, which is it? The basic highlights talks about 5-foot wide walking path, yet the plan shows a 4-foot wide.
So are we doing... So that's an error on my part. It's 4 foot. It should be 4 foot all the way. This is my document. This is,
okay.
Yep, it should be 4 foot.
And what's the purpose of that walkway?
So there's a walkway, so there's a pedestrian fence all the way around, and then there's the walkway so that pedestrians can go around the entirety of the track to view events. If you look on that same design, there's another dotted line that kind of rounds the oval and then joins the top of that wall and goes out. That's a 6-foot fence. So across the whole back, They would be a 6-foot fence against the marsh and a 4-foot fence against the playing field.
So the amenities building on the left side is the restrooms, if you will.
Yep.
And these two aren't connected, these two buildings?
They are. It would be one building structure with a walkway between the two. So it'd be a consistent roof across.
It's a covered walkway.
A walkway from one side to the other? No, to walk through.
To walk through.
So when you say it's a connected building, just a roof over it.
The roof, exactly.
In the building on the left, you estimated at 400,000.
The building on the left, the restrooms? That, yes.
This whole amenities building is not part of the project to the extent that it's going to be bid separately.
It would be bid separately, yes.
The rest of it is going to be under one GC.
Yes. And it could end up being the same GC. It very well could not, because it has to be bid out. The 3039M governs horizontal construction, public works. Chapter 149 governs, so they have to be two separate processes.
And on the vertical building, the block, is that a one-story or more than one story?
It's one story.
In the wrong business.
We did talk about a second floor storage space, but the feeling was that that would become like an attic and full of things that nobody knew what to do with.
Brian, I just say I used to work as a bricklayer. I know what an 8-inch block costs. I know what a 12-inch block costs. I know how many you put in a day. Union bricklayers put in 200 a day. Private goes much higher. The price is off the chart.
And I mean, in Gale Associates and Sal would tell you the same exact thing, that it's all based on the bids. And again, in the spring, I mean, they had contractors coming to the table telling them they were inflating these prices. And they were winning bids, unfortunately.
Anything else?
The question I have is for the utilities building as well. Is it possible to build only the restroom section and not the other half of it, depending on what those bids come back? I mean, obviously, it would be nice to do it all at once, but like if we get down to the wire and depending on the price, you could do it in two phases. We have to put the bathrooms in. That's not negotiable.
The bathrooms are non-negotiable, yes.
Right.
The other half is negotiable. It could be done, you have what's called bid alts, or alternative bids, so that, here's the main bid, and as an alternative, what if you made it into a full building? So it could be done. I think that the numbers are disparate enough in that we would want to make a choice going forward, because it's not, I mean, the numbers may come in cheaper in the spring, but an $800,000 building is not going to be $400,000. It might be 750. It might be 745. So I think that there has to be some decision on, should we move forward with assuming the full building, or should we refine that back? Because they're gonna move forward here and start to design these further. Yes.
We need to call them tomorrow to tell them what the scope is. If we leave the amenities building out, or at least leave the restrooms in and cut the rest out, it can't be put back in. You've got a meeting scheduled here for January 7th where you could take that decision.
The final.
So our advice is include the amenities building, see what the costs
able to pull
like
it out later.
as we go through to January, and then make a decision.
And as they're going through the designs, they can, Sal was going through like a traditional styled building versus something that matches the more modern arches and big blue walls out front. So he can work with two concepts. So like he can work with two concepts for what this would look like, he could also work on a concept where it would be just the restrooms as well. Or maybe just the restrooms and a storage or a small ticket booth or something that is more towards the 400,000. So we can certainly ask him to kind of go two approaches.
Brian, just one more quick one. Could this amenities building be done privately, or does it have to be done publicly?
That's convoluted. It is being done on public property. So regardless of it, whether it is funded privately or not, the project has to pay prevailing wage. So Could it be done? Yes. It's tricky. The state has made it perfectly convoluted to be able to have, because there are local contractors who would get involved. Absolutely.
I mean, it's just that, I mean, we're talking about $800,000 on a project that is going up from a meeting not too long ago.
Yep. And certainly the scope of the building has changed as well. That's not just, inflation in the bids. But as I said on the other sheet, I think there are other in-kind donations that could reduce this cost. And certainly over time, like Christopher said, if the final decision isn't being made until January 7th in regards to here is the bid package that we're putting together for what we want for a stadium, I will know more by then. Hopefully know a lot more.
All right, so keeping in mind that we can take things out in January, but we can't put things back in, could we, and the type of playing surface that we have discussed in the scope of this project, I believe, is the artificial turf.
The pricing is artificial, yes.
Okay. So could we have a motion to approve the scope of the project as a whole, the developmental timeline, and the type of playing surface as artificial turf?
So moved.
I'll second it.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor? Unanimous. Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is the school committee self-evaluation process. In Annex 13, you have the policy taken from our policy manual. We are taking a look at this. I don't know if any of you had a chance to look this over, if you have any suggestions, changes that you'd like to make. Recommend. If you've not had a chance to look this over, then I don't know that I want to have everybody start to read it right now and look it over. You did, okay. Everybody's, okay. Does anybody have any? No? Okay.
I think the only, if you're happy with the material, is the timeline is probably the.
Does anyone have any suggestions? Christopher, do you have any recommendations?
Well, you've set yourself some goals, so that becomes part of it. And clearly, the closer you can get to the end of the session, the better in many ways. On the other hand, as we've talked about in terms of my evaluation, June becomes a very busy month.
What about with regard to the elections? And new members coming on, and should the evaluation be complete, say somebody's running again? I don't know.
Well, I think you can decide yourselves what the rhythm of the year is. It's probably easier for you to detach yourself from the school year in detail than it is in terms of evaluating me and my evaluating colleagues.
If the content meets with everybody's approval, if you would like to give some thought between now and December 10th to the timeline, we could do that.
I think the timeline's fine.
You think the timeline's fine as is?
Yep.
Okay. All right, then we're okay. We'll keep it then. Thank you. Next, the policy subcommittee, some second readings.
These have not changed since you last saw them.
Do we want to take these individually or as a group?
I'd like to take them individually if we could.
Okay. Could we have a motion to approve the overnight out-of-state and international school-sponsored visits as a second reading? Second? Any discussion?
I do have a discussion about the international
Okay.
aspect of the policy, and it just pertains to a discussion that we had in one of the policy subcommittee meetings, but I don't think we had it in the last one, and that was about trying to implement some sort of a Cori analysis when we send students to foreign countries. And I know that that's difficult sometimes because not every foreign country has that kind of a setup, but it is something that we did discuss in the policy subcommittee meeting, and I think it's something that we should contemplate.
Can I say I did follow that up, particularly with our French leaderine, who organises the visit to France. She was in touch with people in France. The French teachers said, well, if there were any problems, their equivalent of Department of Children and Families would be telling them about it. Everybody knows everybody else around here and their business, and we're pretty confident that there won't be any problematic families hosting incoming children. That was the best we got. I mean, we really have no leverage on this unless we were to stipulate that we would only send students to countries that had the equivalent of our arrangements.
And I did speak with Mr. Michneau, and I obtained the same information when I went as a chaperone on one of the trips, but I questioned to the committee, is that adequate? Is that enough? That there be an informal analysis, if you will, of the families and an assurance that, you know, there's no problem over there. Is that sufficient?
Well, based on what Mr. Farmer just said, short of deciding we're not going to send students to countries that don't do the similar test, that would be the only other choice, correct?
I think so. I mean, basically, if families are willing to have a student from another country come and stay for a while, they're going to make their interest known to the school. I think if a school, if we had some doubts about a family who wanted to act as hosts, we would find some diplomatic ways of having a conversation with the family around, are you really sure this is something that you want to do?
Linda?
I also had a conversation with Mr. Michneau and Mrs. Simons on this subject, and they just said that because Mrs. Simons has done this for so many years, she's comfortable with the people who, as well as this Spain trip we're going to be looking at, that the people who are scheduling these are people who have scheduled them for years and are comfortable with the people who they've dealt with. And again, just like around here, you know, if there's families that you diplomatically want to say that they shouldn't host, they have the same types of things there. I had a very long conversation with Mrs. Simons on this.
Mm-hmm. The other version, like the visit to Spain, that's on your agenda for approval. I mean, those are companies who are going to check who their drivers are and who their chaperones are. Because that's part of their business.
Okay, I'm comfortable with it. I just I spoke personally with Mr. Michneau, and I was reassured the same way. But I just wanted to make sure that the committee has considered this.
Is there any further discussion? All those in favor? Unanimous. Thank you very much. Could we have a motion to approve the tobacco-free schools policy as a second reading?
So moved.
Could we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Thank you. And could we have a motion to approve the policy on the administration of medications to students as a second reading?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Unanimous again. Thank you very much. Moving along to the report of the superintendent of schools.
Thank you. You'll see I've had a fairly busy schedule. I didn't get to the Winthrop football game, but I did get to the girls' soccer game at Linfield on Monday. I don't think there's anything particular I want to draw attention to there. On the grading practice, the number of teachers coming to the meetings that have been made available to discuss The issue have been very poorly attended. There were 12 at Salisbury on a day when they were opening their Kids Inc. Program, and a number of teachers apologized for not getting there. There were 4 at Newbury. I'm thinking now 1 at Pine Grove, none from the middle school. There is 1 further opportunity scheduled. I don't know whether this is passive aggressiveness or they have decided that there's nothing really left to discuss. I really don't know. I think that we clearly have a problem, and I've restated one in the example I've given you there, where you have reports where students are apparently doing, in some cases very well, in others certainly passing midterm exams and final exams, but in some cases failing their final average score and getting no credit for the work, despite the fact that in the control situation of a test, they're showing that they can do it. I'm preparing a survey for families and teachers on the non-academic attributes of students that we should be reporting on. I hope to have that out before the end of this week. Then we'll take it from there. On the teacher licensure show, this is one of the things that the chairperson mentioned was a topic of conversation amongst 2 small groups, and I think the report is self-explanatory. The superintendents who met the DESE asked them to take off the table immediately any proposal that provided a very tight alignment between the evaluation system and licensure. In fact, my own view is, if you really wanted to throw a spanner in the works in terms of what we've been trying to do to establish an evaluation arrangement, which is in its pilot 3rd year this year, this is exactly the kind of proposal that would bulldoze right the way through the work that we have been doing. My own view is that the DSE will spend its time better making sure that the colleges and universities that help prepare teachers do everything that they can to make sure that they are ready and able to take on a class as they come into teaching. I think our own view is that we've recruited some very capable young teachers in recent years. We may be in a slightly more favourable situation than some inner city districts, but I think really getting the teacher preparation right at the front end is where they should be spending time, so that our role is to induct them into our system and then support their development, rather than being part of the licensure system. Because if you had an individual district that was saying this teacher is not suitable, well, maybe it's just a poor match for the district, not necessarily somebody who couldn't make a contribution somewhere. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. The Foundation Budget Review Commission, it says here there's a draft response attached. We don't have that draft response yet. We do have material that's been produced by the Superintendents Association's guru on funding. And if I may, I will put something together in draft form and circulate it to you. We do now know that the hearing next Monday is going to be at the Danvers Middle School at I think 4:30 to 6:30. They're providing 3 minutes for each person who chooses to speak. If you're going to go, you could choose different areas of the issues to talk about rather than try to talk about the whole lot in 3 minutes. But certainly Brian and I intend to go and present on that occasion, and we will have a document that they can then take away. Moving on, another productive part of the conference for me was a discussion on the future of education collaboratives. You'll see from the report the Commissioner is trying to introduce arrangements that he's familiar with in Connecticut, And I think that the superintendents who primarily serve on the boards of collaboratives are not very happy that the commissioner is wanting in some ways to make collaboratives the handmaiden of the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education in helping them roll out their developments. As I commented at the meeting, the department hasn't shown itself to be very much aware of what Kim calls implementation science. They've been making it up as it goes along, and I'm concerned that collaboratives, which are creatures of school districts, would be essentially taken over by the state. The other issue is that the functions performed by collaboratives vary quite widely across the state. Some of them are very much involved with issues outside special education. They do a lot of, in some cases, vocational programming, not just for students with special needs, but a bit like a technical vocational high school, a lot of professional development. We have a very well-grounded, successful consortium providing professional development in the Northeast here, and certainly we would want, if this goes through, the capacity to say thank you very much, but we don't want to do that unless they legislate that we have to. So we need to keep an eye open on that. A couple of things not in the report. I circulated to you for information the possibility of budget problems, not just next year but this year, and there being some 9C cuts which the governor can impose. And there have been years, certainly my first year in Gloucester, there were 9C cuts that involved us cutting out the world languages in the middle school in Gloucester that year. So that could be important. The other is I have responded to draft regulations to do with the restraint of children who need restraining, and the DSE's attempt to put a maximum time limit on the time that a student can be in what's called timeout when they're separated from the class. The notion that all children are going to sort of calm down and be ready to go back into class after 30 minutes is not real. Professionals have to work with the children to kind of decompress them, get them back to feeling okay again before they can go back to the class. The other concern was the amount of administrative work that will be generated, including further reporting to the DSE. I will circulate the letter that I sent off to you for your information. I think that's all I have this evening. As usual, if there are questions on the report or any other matters between us, we'll do our best to answer.
Any questions for Mr. Farmer? Paul?
Mr. Farmer, I'm just wondering, on this grading practice, is there any way the failure to attend could be tied into educator evaluations at all?
The failure?
The failure of the teachers to attend at any of these meetings to discuss?
No, they were entirely voluntary. I wanted to see if people were interested and willing to come and talk. I don't know that making people come compulsory to talk about professional matters is necessarily the best way of working with them. They'll have had an opportunity, and they'll have a further opportunity to comment when we get some more specific proposals.
Just one other question. Did you hear back from the state at all on the 21st century inquiry that you had
Yes,
done?
I did. In fact, I was looking at the responses that we got today. It came in during last week. I started looking at it, and we have Patty printed out all the materials that they sent. They haven't really responded to my communication because I asked for any electronic communications or paper communications between the parties who were making the decision. None of that has been provided. So all I've really got is the proposals from some of the other districts and an analysis of those. But it's impossible to know what's real and what's not. And certainly, I'm much more interested in the communications between the parties within the department given my suspicions that it's who you know rather than what you know that might have been the determining factor.
Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that up, Paul. Any other questions for Mr. Fowler? All right, thank you. Some subcommittee action items. Finance Subcommittee, we need a motion to approve the FY15 adjusted operating budget as recommended by the Finance Subcommittee. It's meeting on October 14th, 2014.
So moved.
Could we have a second on that, please? Any discussion? All those in favor? Unanimous, thank you. Could we have a motion to approve the establishment of a revolving account for revenues and expenditures associated with guidance student assessment services?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? And unanimous, thank you. Next item, a field visit. To approve the following out-of-state international field visit, it would be 25 high school students traveling to Valencia, Spain, July 13th to 17th, 2015.
So moved.
Could we have a second?
Second?
Discussion? Paul?
So in defense of myself, I recognize that when the program is well established, that we rely on the professionalism of the neighboring country educator, but what do we do when it's the first trip?
I don't think this is an exchange. This is just a trip to Spain, so they won't be in homes.
Just raising the point.
Well, I'll be willing to go ahead and inspect all the families and give you a report on it. Should the whole team, yes.
It's all funny until there's a problem, guys.
Any further discussion?
No.
All those in favor? Unanimous again, thank you. Just one thing I want to remind everybody, our next regular meeting is December 10th, but we do have a district communications meeting on December 3rd, just reminding. We need a motion to go into executive session, not to return to open session for the purpose of discussing educator evaluations. We need a roll call vote. I need a motion. You can tell we're getting tired. Could we have a roll call vote, Paul? Yes.
Yes.
Yes, it's unanimous. We're going into executive session, not to return to open session.
Actually, you would need to, if you agree this, then you would need to agree to an open session for it to become effective. Sorry, I should
Check that. We'll be back.
So you'll be back in open session if necessary.
If necessary, yes.
I don't mind if you'd like to come. Call me in the morning. No, and if you'd like to come, you're welcome, but I think I can handle it.
start eating cookies. Mr. Farmer, would you like to report to the open meeting?
I guess I
Or
will.
Robin would like to report to the open meeting? Okay.
All right, I'd like to report the fact that the committee unanimously approved the proposed changes to the professional growth cycle in the educator evaluation as presented.
Thank you very much. Could we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to
So,
adjourn.
have you voted on that motion?
Oh, could we?
Do I have a motion to adjourn?
No.
Or
We have to move that.
You-
Oh, we
you
do
just
it in
need-
open session, okay.
Could we have a motion to that?
I'll make a motion.
You made the motion, but nobody seconded it.
Second.
Any discussion?
I'm sorry. No, it's all right. All those in favor?
I can't vote.
Unanimous? Want to take over to adjourn?
About all I have left. Could we have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second? Second. Any discussion? Good. All in favor?
She's at the time.